Good morning, everyone. Jim Giacchetta here with VidOvation Corporation. I'm the CTO and co-founder. Today we have a very special guest, Ron Feldman, PhD, founder and CEO of QVidium Technologies. Thank you, Ron. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Jim. Yes, as mentioned, I'm Ron Feldman. I'm the founder and CEO of QVidium. Before that, I was the founder and CEO of Path1 Network Technologies. Today I'm going to talk about ARQ for video transport, how it works, a little of the history of how we came to invent it, and our latest product, our HEVC 4K codec. Okay, Jim?
Yeah, so I don't know, I want to get a little gauge from some of our viewers. Are you folks transporting video over the public internet for a live broadcast application? We're talking more than, GoToWebinar, Skype, or Zoom, something for broadcast purposes, production purposes, over the top, OTT, something like that. Are you folks streaming video over the public internet right now? Just want to get a feel for where you guys are. Ron's company is one of the pioneers in this area and was recently acknowledged, what was it, last year, Ron, by the Academy, Technical Arts and Sciences Academy. So he has an Academy Award for technology. So here, let me see here now. Let me manage the poll. Oh, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to close it and then share. Here we go. So here are the results. So you can see 60% of people are streaming. 40% don't have plans to stream. Well, Ron, we got to win them over, or I hope we're not wasting their time today if they have no plans to stream live, or maybe it's my marketing people. They only do Zoom and GoToMeeting. They don't do live broadcast. But thanks everyone for voting. So let me advance the slides here for you, Ron, and let's get to it.
All right. So as you may know, if you're familiar with the internet, when the internet was designed back in the 60s, it was never designed for live video. In fact, the technology didn't even exist back then. It was designed for best effort transport. There's no prioritization. In fact, even multicast is not allowed to go through the internet. The routers will drop multicast packets. They'll drop any prioritization. So if you have congestion at nodes, if multiple streams are trying to go through a particular node, the routers are designed to drop the packets. They'll sometimes have various algorithms to decide what goes first, but the bottom line is, if you're trying to get packets over the internet, not only can you not rely on the packets getting through, but some internet service providers do things like dynamic load balancing to alleviate congestion. They'll, in the middle of sending a bunch of packets out, they'll switch the routing around, which would cause the packets to come in out of order. So if you're trying to send video, you're going to have to understand that packets can get dropped, they can get out of order, there could be random delays, which we call jitter. None of these things are good for trying to get any kind of live broadcast video. Of course, if you're streaming video where it's basically short file chunks that are being buffered and played out, it's not much of a problem. So the biggest issue is if you're trying to do a live low latency broadcast over the internet.
So Ron, why did you invent this technology? What was I think you had certain customers that were having a problem trying to stream through the internet, right? Why did this all come about?
So to get to the why, it really started with the telemedicine, actually. Before starting Path One, I had started and was working at Path One Network Technologies, and all of our customers there were large broadcasters. They had their own private network. I left Path One, and I was approached by a friend. I used to be a professor at UCSD, and a former colleague there knew the doctors in the stroke center at UCSD. So these two neurologists said they had a big problem. They have this new wonder drug called TPA, and it's like a miracle drug that will dissolve clots very quickly. And if somebody has a stroke, if they have, there's two types of strokes. There's an aneurysm where the blood vessel bursts, but then there's a thrombolytic stroke where there's a clot. And if they had a thrombolytic stroke, this is like a miracle cure. But if you give it to somebody who had an aneurysm, then it would kill them. So you needed a way to diagnose people, and there aren't a lot of neurologists around the place. If you're in the middle of, well, one of our first sites was Brawley, California, and there aren't a lot of neurologists in these remote rural areas. So these neurologists at UCSD wanted to be able to diagnose people far away. And because of this drug that was available in all the emergency rooms, it was mostly used for heart attacks, they now had an opportunity to literally cure people who had strokes that were miles away from the nearest neurologist. And so they came to me saying we needed good quality video. The video couldn't have any lost packets, because if you lose a packet, you're going to get some kind of jitter or pausing in the video, and that defeats the whole purpose of being able to diagnose the patient. So a neurologist is going to have a patient do something like raise your arm and then slowly lower it. Well, if somebody had a stroke and there'd be weakness, they could see it by the jerkiness or jitteriness in the motion, but the same kind of problems can appear if you have packet loss. So they needed to rely on the fact that the video that's coming through, every single packet was getting through there, and that you were getting smooth, a smooth, reliable feed. And so that was the genesis or the inspiration to create this ARQ for the internet. We've always had, ARQ is not a new concept, and there's a slide on that later on. Maybe we're jumping ahead of ourselves. But, if we look, going back to the slide over here, if you look at what the internet was designed for, there's really basically two types of traffic that you can send on the internet. There's UDP, which is user datagram protocol, which basically is, it's like the Wild West. You send a packet out and you have no idea if it's going to get to the other side or not, or if it's going to get it, that they're out of order. So you'd have to do things to UDP to make it work for video, which is what we do with our ARQ technology. And then there's TCP, and TCP is designed for reliable transport. It's a transmission control protocol where you have these windows that have of packets that get sent across, and with every window you have an acknowledgement. So it's great for things like email or web pages to make sure that all the email gets through, but there's no real-time guarantees on this. It could pause indefinitely, waiting for the packet to get over to the other side. The pauses could be 30 seconds or longer. Every single time a window of packets gets to the other side, it has to wait for a positive acknowledgement from the other side before it can send out another window of packets. And this causes a limitation on the maximum bit rate. If you have a lot of hops, you have to go around the world, maybe up through a satellite, and you have to wait each time for an acknowledgement. Well, the longer the latency is, the more time it takes before you can get this acknowledgement, and the slower the maximum bit rate that you can send through with TCP is. So you know, TCP is okay if you have a relatively good link and you're just doing streaming where you don't care if you're buffering up the video and there's, you know, a lot of delay, but it's really not appropriate for a live broadcast.
So your approach is to take a UDP stream and you make it more robust with ARQ, which you'll describe on the following slides.
Exactly. So we start with UDP, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see
Sure
what it is we do.
I can hear you, Ron, but maybe it's a little muffled since you're using the internal mic. Maybe lean into your mic a little bit so we
Okay,
can
sure.
we can hear all your good stuff here. Let me advance. Yeah, I think you're using the built-in mic, right, on your computer?
Yeah, I do have a headset if you want me to use it.
No, that's much better now with you leaning in. That's perfect.
All right. Okay, so what we decided to do, so, you know, as these neurologists, like I said, came to me, they wanted the packets to all be there, not to get lost. So the idea was to have a feedback mechanism. And before that, there were feed-forward mechanisms to try to fix packet loss. You'd send extra packets along with the stream, and if some of the packets got lost in the stream, you'd use the extra packets, the checksum packets, to try to fill in the gaps. But that only goes so far. If you have large amounts of random packet loss, FEC really doesn't work well. When I was at Path 1, another thing we tried in addition to FEC, by the way, the FEC we did at Path 1, it became standard ST 2022, which was also known as Pro-MPEG forward error correction. But again, that was only good really for private networks. The other thing they tried doing was sending a completely redundant second stream. Again, if you have large amounts of packet loss, this might not even fix things. And the problem with that is you're also doubling the bandwidth. So after leaving Path 1 and getting in touch with these doctors, thought the best thing to do would be to have a feedback mechanism. So that's really what ARQ is all about. If you lose a packet, you detect that on the receiving end. You make sure you have sequence numbers, and there's already a protocol in place for doing that called RTP, which puts a little header on UDP packets. It adds in sequence numbers, it adds in a timestamp, and now we use those mechanisms, those placeholders that they have in the RTP packets to have a sequence number to see if there's a gap in the sequence number, and if there is, you have the receiver send the packet back upstream requesting a retransmission of whatever packets were lost. So
well, like you mentioned forward error correction too. Forward error correction. So say you set forward error correction for like 20% redundancy, but if everything is operating normally and there are no packet losses, you've now taken 20% away from the usable bandwidth for video, where you could push through higher quality video. So in a sense, this only kicks in when it's needed, right?
So that's an excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up. And that's one of the points we mentioned here at the bottom. There's literally zero overhead. If you have a clean network, unlike FEC with ARQ, you're only sending those retransmission requests if you have packet loss. And any kind of packet loss, any kind of patterns of packet loss, you could correct for because you're asking for whatever packets are lost, and you can ask for it over and over again. Unlike FEC, where you only get, you know, whatever packets are given to you, you can either, you could try to use them, but if you don't have enough packets to replace the lost ones, you're out of luck. And as Jim said, you're sending all those extra packets without any guarantees that they're going to fix it.
Right. Or I would say, in my mind, FEC is kind of like a brute force approach. We'll send all this redundancy through, 20% redundancy, and hope the packets that we don't. So if we set it to 20%, we hope we don't exceed 20% of loss. But you could have a frame that loses 30% of its packets. FEC won't be able to recover it, where ARQ could fill in all those missing pieces.
That's right. So ARQ is capable of 100% packet recovery. It can, even with very high loss rates. I mean, we've seen loss rates of 40, 50%. Really the only downside there is you need extra margin of overhead to be able to send large bursts to recover packets. But again, if you don't have a lot of loss to begin with, you don't need much overhead. Now the downside, the only negative on ARQ is you do create a buffer on the receive side. So what you do is at the receiving side, instead of just receiving the packet and sending it out to the video decoder, you put a little buffer in the way. So this buffer holds the packet long enough so that if you have any gaps in there, you have time for the receiver to send the packet upstream to the encoder, to the transmitter. And the encoder doesn't have to be the transmitter. We actually have ARQ software that you can use if you have an encoder that doesn't have ARQ included in it. And so whatever the sender is, the receiver is going to send the packet upstream, the retransmission request packet, for the sender to send back a copy of whatever packets are missing. And then they get put in the buffer, put back into the right order in that buffer, so that when they get played out of the buffer, they get played out in the right order and with all the packets hopefully there. If you need more time so that you have more chances of asking for a retransmission, because with ARQ, you don't just ask once, you can ask multiple times in case there's packet loss for the upstream packets as well, or there's additional packet loss for the retransmitted packets. So you can ask multiple times. You just need a bigger buffer that gives you more resilience. If you need lower latency, well, you have a smaller buffer and maybe there'd be a little less resilience. But the buffer size isn't actually that large. If you look at what FEC requires, FEC, you have to have a buffer of all of the packets in the window that you're doing the FEC over, and you have to be able to receive those packets before you can start processing the checksum packets. So that takes a certain amount of delay. If you are on a wireless network or not too many hops where the round trip time is fairly low, you might actually have a smaller round trip time or smaller delay using ARQ than FEC in addition.
I know many systems, some of the systems we utilize use a combination of both, some FEC and ARQ. I think some vendors even have a dynamic element to the FEC. FEC kind of does the set to a minimum. If the connection is going poor, it goes up and down. So you're a proponent of not using FEC at all, or do you see cases where you might use a combination of ARQ and FEC? What are your thoughts on that?
That's an interesting question, because when we first started doing this, we did actually combine FEC with ARQ. The telemedicine system that we created for the neurologists did have the ability to both do FEC and then ARQ on top of it. But we found that it really didn't help. You're using up or wasting the extra bandwidth for the FEC, but the ARQ is so efficient and so effective that having FEC in addition to it was actually just a waste of bandwidth and time, because you have the additional latency of processing the FEC buffer. So we dropped that in the products and we started making for broadcasters, because the key there was to try to get lower latency while you're doing the error recovery.
Very good, very good. Are you done with this slide? You want me to continue?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
There we go.
So one way that you could envision using this is if you have multiple encoders, you can send them up to a central location, maybe a server in the cloud that's running an ARQ proxy server. So like I said, we have our ARQ both within our products, and I'm showing our QV Codec 4K, our new 4K box is an example of some encoders sending up into the internet. You can have Amazon Web Services, for example, host some software that runs the ARQ. We've had many installations where we would use ARQ to get a live stream up into a server, and then use, maybe to send it to a CDN, and at the CDN, They can even send out a stream with RTMP or some other protocol. But if you really wanted low latency, you're going to want ARQ on both ends. And so you can have the proxy server that's in the middle send out to multiple destinations to keep the latency low. You can use ARQ with encryption. We do that all the time. And this kind of technique I'm showing here really minimizes the amount of bandwidth, because most facilities don't have a lot of upstream bandwidth, but there's plenty of bandwidth in the cloud. So if you want to distribute a stream to hundreds of locations and you don't have a lot of bandwidth where you are, you just need to send one copy of the stream up to the server where the ARQ can replicate the stream and send it to as many places as you want, where there's plenty of bandwidth to do that.
Well, what was I going to say? So one of the things, Ron, is I guess one of your big differentiators or your strengths or a strength of this technique is low latency.
Exactly.
I know with some of our bonded cellular partners, public internet now is pretty reliable. You know, it's statistically the losses are now minimal. You can get higher quality internet connections. I think with cellular, it's a different animal. We have the jitter is crazy. The latency is yo-yoing up and down. The bandwidth is going up and down. So I think it's a much more challenging environment. And I think in that sense, maybe a little bit of FEC and ARQ is warranted. But your sweet spot is low latency over the public internet, isn't that correct?
That's right, and you'll see that in the next slide. It's really a cornerstone of the patent that we have. So this is this diagram came right out of the patent we had for ARQ, and you'll notice a key component of it is an area that we call clock synchronization. What we do is we timestamp the packets when they go out, and we have a clock on the receiver that's synchronized to the timestamp of the packet when it goes out. Now, you could use any type of clock. It could be NTP timestamps, but our patent covers all of that. So this is unique to QVidium. Any other kind of FEC, or I'm sorry, any other kind of ARQ technology would be infringing on our patent if they were to use this kind of clock synchronization to try to minimize the latency. And why that's so important is because when you have when you create this extra buffer at the receiving end, so that you can wait long enough to put all these packets to gather back any missing packets and put them in the right order, you want to be able to make that packet buffer just the right size, just as small as it needs to be without having to wait extra. So what you can do is, if you have everything synchronized and you know what the delay is, which you can measure from the sender to the receiver, then you could time when the packets leave the buffer using your clock, and that really allows you to create an ARQ system with absolutely lowest delay. So going into this diagram to see how this works, as in your encoder, you have the packets going out of your encoder, going to the transmit unit, which is where it's stamping the packet. There's a green, the green dots there is the animator to show the packets leaving the transmitter, leaving the encoder, going into the receiving unit. And the red is to show the reverse stream, the retransmission request stream going back up to the sending side, where it's asking for the additional packets. Now, what you do in ARQ on the sending side, well, there really isn't that much other than stamping the packet with the time clock and processing the request coming back in. You have an ARQ packet store where you're just storing the packets as they're going out. That doesn't add any extra latency. So at the same time the packet is going out, it's going into this ARQ packet store.
Yeah, but so on the encoder side, you don't usually think of buffering. You think of buffering on the receiver for FEC or ARQ. in order for the packets to be retransmitted, you have to have a bucket to store the packets for retransmission. So that's the ARQ package storage.
That's right, but that doesn't delay anything because it just stores it at the same time as the packets go out, but it doesn't eat up any time doing that.
And you based on how deep is that storage usually? A couple of frames, a couple of lines? Like how do you gauge how big that is, that storage?
Well, usually part of that really depends on the sequence number. What we do is in an easy implementation, and again, the patent covers all sorts of implementations where you can have much larger sequence numbers, but the typical RTP packet header only has 16 bit, which is 64,000 packets worth of buffer space of sequence number, really. So, we could store up to 64,000 packets, which is enough for even relatively high bit rates. The higher the bit rate, the more storage you would need because
correct.
To recover. But it's really not been much of a problem.
Well, and then I guess that begs the question is, this is all automatic. So me, the user, we don't even have to think about this. The mechanism just runs. I don't have to think about the depth of the buffer, or can you adjust the buffer depth on the decode side?
So that's also a really good question. Let me talk about that a little bit. The way we've implemented ARQ, the calibration is completely automatic, and there's very little that the user has to do, and yet it optimizes the error recovery. The only real parameter that you have to think about is how much extra delay that you want to add to the system. The more delay, the more chance it can retransmit the extra packets, the more tries you have to recover any lost packets. And so if you have complete control over that, if you in our systems, you could set the delay to 0 if you want, and then the system will measure the round trip time, figure out what the minimum value is, and then put that in there and create a buffer that's really minimal. It could be just 1 round trip time. We have a robust mode where it makes sure it's at least 2 round trip times. And then you don't even have to think about it. You just start it up with let it do its thing with automatic configuration, and you don't have to set anything. On the other hand, if you did want to completely configure it yourself, you have access to all those parameters. You can in fact override the round trip time. You could override the amount of jitter that the system is calculating in the network, because if there's jitter in the system, you have to add that to the buffer so the buffer can buffer out any jitter. If packets are being held at nodes throughout the internet for random amounts of time, that will create random delays in the packet, which we call jitter, which you want to buffer out and have a little extra buffer space to do so. So, the internet itself, even if there's no packet loss at all, you're going to want to have a little bit of buffering, because otherwise the packets arriving at your decoder will have gaps of time before they come in, which would be the jitter caused by...
Yeah, they might not be missing, but they might be out of order, so you need a little bit of time to put them in the proper order, correct?
Exactly. They could be out of order. They could just be delayed even if they're not out of order, and that could cause a decoder to run dry, which would also cause freezing. So you have to have at least enough buffering in there to buffer out the jitter, to buffer out any reordering that might take place. And again, this is all done basically automatically in our system, but you can put in larger times in our system if you happen to know that there's some reordering going on, and you know the length of time, the latency that happens over. So you have both the ability to have it being done completely automatically and the ability to override the settings and adjust for specific types of scenarios.
Very good, very good. All right, let me advance. Oh, the animation started again. There we go.
We were talking a little bit before about the origins of ARQ. You see a picture over there. You see the governor at the time was Arnold Schwarzenegger. He came to to see the two neurologists, or the two guys that like lab coats. So this was back in 2004. There was an article written, I think it was a Union Tribune or some such a magazine or newspaper about the neurologists. We had systems set up not only throughout California, but in other states. A lot of systems in Arizona, Montana, even New York. At one point, this was under PF Technology, with which we started immediately after Path 1, then got subsumed by QVidium. So as I mentioned, the concept of ARQ, or automatic repeat or retransmission request, I think it's repeat request. It's not new. It was used in shortwave radio. There's a paper even as back as 1963 about selective repeat ARQ. Most of the systems that were called ARQ were positive acknowledgement. In other words, like TCP, you send some packets out, or even one packet, and you have to wait for a reply before you could send more packets out. And that has its own problems. But in video, the idea is that if you're missing a packet and you haven't asked for it, it's already been played out, that part of the video stream is played out, you can't go back and reinsert it. So there's a real-time live aspect to sending live video. So it became, we thought it was much more efficient, smarter to create a negative acknowledgement system. So we created the ARQ, unlike the other ARQ systems that were around at the time, that only asked for packets if they were needed, if it was missing. And it also had a timeout mechanism, because it is video after all that we're optimizing this for, which had never been done before. So that if the packet was missing, but that portion of the video stream has already been played out, there's no use asking for it again. So we time out.
It'll be too late.
It's too late. So it wasn't unlike TCP, which is trying to require every last packet to always get there. We realized there could be certain limitations with the internet. There could be unrecoverable packets. And by the way, in the telemedicine system, there was a little red square, a little square on the indicator on the screen that the doctors could look at that would be green if all the packets were being recovered and the video they're looking at was perfect, or if there was some unrecoverable packet loss. And so they knew at that portion of the video, they knew not to trust it.
Hmm.
So,
so you were saying that when we were talking the other day, this necessity, this telemedicine necessity, it's a matter of life and death. Like you said, if they diagnosed the stroke incorrectly, gave the wrong medicine, they could kill the patient. And I know we do a lot with sports, the tracking of a baseball, leaving the bat, going over a sea of faces, or the basketball, the orange ball going over a sea of faces. If you're dropping packets, you get artifacts, you get jitter, you get stuttering, it's dropping a frame. So if you're trying to do this neurology test, hey, if we drop a packet during Monday Night Football, no one's going to die. So I say that your application is more critical than broadcast television. So you came in from the roots of something way more critical, and so instead of like, if the decoder, I guess it's like the expression "no news is good news." If the decoder doesn't say, "Hey encoder, I lost packet 101," it assumes it got it. So the only time the ARQ makes a request is if, like you said, the negative acknowledgement. Now, I didn't realize that was your nuance. That was your, so that's your patent. That's how you guys are doing it.
It combines that. Really, it's combining that with the synchronization. So the patent has both aspects in there. There was around the time that we did our ARQ, Fujitsu had a positive acknowledgement ARQ for video. And again, nobody had the synchronization either. So those two things combined is what's unique in our patent. And also around that time when we were doing this, Polycom had a video conferencing system So people were doing some video, but what they did if they had packet loss was they would interpolate the video to fill in the gaps. So they would sort of fudge it. And you couldn't do that in a stroke case. You can't, you know, if you have, you know, this thing where there's suddenly a packet loss, and you know, suddenly you'd have a pause or skip, and it would suddenly go down. In the Polycom type of system, they'd fill in the gaps and they would make it look smooth, even if it wasn't. And that would be disastrous if you're trying to diagnose a stroke patient who might actually had a weakness that
and then
was covering up.
you smooth it out. Or I could think of another example. You know, you're looking at an MRI or an X-ray, and there's a black spot, there's cancer, there's a problem, there's a tumor. Maybe it's very small, and you smooth that out or extrapolate that, and you miss something. Some of our other vendors call what you're talking about concealment. So like in television, if there's an area of green grass and a packet gets dropped, forward error correction, ARQ can't fix it. The decoder is going to make the assumption, well, everything around it is green. I'm going to assume the missing packet is green, but maybe that missing packet's a golf ball or something like that. So
exactly, that's a good analogy. Yeah. So so this was, you know, back in 2003 where we started doing that. Then we started to here we had some contacts in the broadcast industry still from my Path 1 days, and they were saying they had systems. First was broadcaster in France, I think it was RTO, that was saying that they wanted to be able to take ASI and send it over the internet to another gateway at the other side to get it up to a satellite. And so our very first systems that we made in QVidium were actually ASI to IP gateways. Later we started making encoders. So we started making encoders, I'd say about 2007, and have been making encoders and decoders ever since.
So you just took an ASI stream made by another appliance and then just wrapped it or put it in your own transport with ARQ capability, or you added ARQ capabilities to an ASI stream, basically.
Yeah. So what we did was we took a PC back in those days. We put in an ASI daughter card in the PC, you know, like a PCI card that had an ASI interface, and then it would send the bits into the PC. We wrote software to packetize it, add the ARQ to it. At the other end, there'd be another PC with another ASI card, which would do the processing on it, and then feed it back to the ASI card. And so you'd have ASI in on one side, went out with the ARQ over the internet, got received on the other side at another gateway. These would be basically gateway units that would take the IP and then convert it back to ASI at the receiving end. So
you touched on it earlier that you do this today. So many customers are, well, I have an older H.264 infrastructure, my encoders and decoders, my encoders and IRDs are working, but we are getting some packet loss. VidOvation and QVidium can put an appliance at either end, at either facility, where we route the legacy streams through them, add ARQ capability on top, send it across the public internet, go into another appliance that decodes the ARQ or adds the missing packets back in. Is that correct, Ron? That you know, you don't have to. Of course, we'd love to sell you the latest and greatest technology, but there are some very economical implementations or methodology where we can add state-of-the-art ARQ to older infrastructure. Is that correct?
Not only, yes, that's absolutely correct. And to put a finer point on it, we've had customers who've even used Raspberry Pis. I mean, it doesn't have to be a powerful device. It could be a very inexpensive, you know, little Raspberry Pi that's the size of a credit card, and it could be doing the ARQ processing.
So it's not very, your software is pretty thin. It's a thin client.
Yeah, it doesn't require much to run on, and the software will run on pretty much any Linux system, and we also have a version for Windows.
Awesome, awesome. Are you done with this slide? You want me to advance?
Right, and I'll just mention, if you want to get a copy of that, the software is at www.qvidium.com/proxy/PROXY. We could send you a trial license, and then you could talk to Jim about getting permanent.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Oh, folks, I should mention, my marketing folks are telling me the question module for some reason is not working. If you have any questions, why don't you just text them to me? My cell phone number is 516-551-3201. So text any questions to 516-551-3201. All right, I advanced, Ron.
All right, great. So this is just, again, showing the telemedicine system. We don't have to spend too much time here, but you could see what the thing looked like. It was basically a IV pole with a camera mounted on the top that the doctors could remotely maneuver. The doctors, you could see the doctor over in the lower left. That particular, he's now in that physician is now in charge of basically Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles now, the cardiac unit. And the doctor over in the lower right, pretending to be a patient, that's Dr. Brett Meyer. So, you could sort of see the camera pointing at him, but the doctor, remember, this is 2003, 2004, 2005. This is before you had really good infrastructure with cell phones and cellular modems. So there was an external modem that they were getting from Verizon that they would attach to their laptop. So they can literally have their laptop anywhere. They could be driving on the freeway, get a call, and set up their laptop with this little cellular modem off on the side, so they can do this over, this regular cellular network, connect into the internet, and whatever packet losses occurred, both over the wireless and the internet, the whole combination of packet loss would be corrected by the ARQ, along with the reordering, the jitter that could be introduced by the network.
Right. Well, this approach is now becoming the norm. A couple of friends of mine are doctors, and they split their time. They do have to go in and see patients face to face for certain types of treatments, but a lot of the follow-up, a lot of the, just taking a nurse will be with the patient, but the doctor will be at home. So I think we're all adjusting to working with Zoom or GoToMeeting or something like that. But for those situations where you need high resolution, high fidelity video, VidOvation and QVidium can certainly help you with that, and that's the applications for this. So here's some of your patents. So as you mentioned, Ron, last year you guys were recognized by the technical Emmy committee. Both you and Fujitsu were credited with inventing ARQ, but with slightly different techniques. So as you said, the negative acknowledgement with the timestamp, that was your contribution, and then Fujitsu had their approach. So you were quite a pioneer there in the early days. So maybe tell us a little bit more about some of these patents that you have.
So as you can see, I listed 3 of them. Of course, there are other patents before that when I was at Path 1 that were all for private networks. So what's unique here is these patents were really designed for getting video over the public internet, and that's what's unique here. The first one is the general ARQ patent. That's the one that combines the negative acknowledgements and the clock synchronization to the standard ARQ type of technology. And so that's the first patent we talked about. We go into a little more detail in terms of patents specifically for the internet clock synchronization, that you could use that synchronization or other synchronizations or other types of clock mechanisms, for that first patent. The second patent is is the clock synchronization we found particularly optimal for the internet. And then we also were dabbling in FEC, as I mentioned, and we created a type of adaptive FEC that was designed specifically for video, so that if you have iframes, you would put in more checksum packets versus if you had B frames or P frames, you'd have fewer. And it allowed FEC to be used on a variable bitrate kind of a system. But and it had a more efficient kind of checksum processing. But again, we found that it wasn't really necessary. The ARQ did such a great job, we just dropped the FEC.
Okay.
So one thing is we've created all our systems so that it does not require having a server in the middle. I did show that diagram in the middle before, where you can have a server in the middle if you wanted to. But all of our systems are designed really for point-to-point, so that you can just set up an encoder in one place and decoder anywhere else in the world. And you can just have those two units talking to each other without a third server or any other device on the internet needing to be in the loop at all.
When might you need a server in the middle? Or it would be more of like a CDN where it's like one to many, and you might need a server?
That's one place. Another place where a server could be useful, and again, we have this technology with our software that allows you to do it, is if you didn't have any kind of way of accessing the firewall. So most routers, if you have an encoder or decoder that's sitting behind a firewall, we have technology that can deal with automatically getting the packets back through the firewall on one side or the other. So we have our system set up so that you could either do what we call push mode, where you just on the encoder side put in the IP address for the destination, and you send this packet over to the other side. But in that case, if the decoder is behind a firewall, you would need to open up the firewall, at least have a port forwarding rule, so that the stream, the video stream, could get over to the decoder. But you don't need to do anything for the reverse stream, the retransmission stream coming back up from the decoder to the encoder. It's automatic. You don't have to put any kind of rules on the encoder side. Or you could do it the other way around. You could have a pull mode, in which case you open up some port forwarding rules on the sending side or the encoder side. But on the decoder side, it just initiates the stream, and you don't have to worry about setting up any rules. But what if you're in a situation where both the encoder and the decoder are sitting behind firewalls, and you don't have any access or ability to open up any ports in either of those firewalls? Well, in that case, you have a server up in the cloud, and you can set up the encoder to be in push mode, the receiver to be in pull, the receiver to be in pull mode, and you don't have to worry about opening up firewalls on either end.
Okay.
So that, to answer your question, that's another reason to have a server in the middle.
Okay.
Let's see, interoperable. And as I mentioned, we designed our ARQ, unlike some other sorts of ARQ systems that now are starting to appear. Our system was designed with RTP protocol in mind, so that if you had a receiver that doesn't have ARQ technology in it, then it's still going to receive the stream. It looks like a standard video, over RTP stream. It just, if the receiver doesn't have the ARQ, it's just not going to recover the lost packets, but it's going to you're going to be able to play it on anything, including VLC, and there's free software. So you have that capability. We have technology built into our box to limit the effect of what I could call positive feedback or packet storms. The one potential problem with ARQ is if you have a limited amount of bandwidth and you have some packet loss, and then you start asking for retransmissions, then you're sending additional packets on this limited bandwidth connection, which could interfere with other packets that you're trying to send on the connection, which could then cause more packet loss, which could cause more retransmissions, which could cause more packet loss, and you get this sort of positive feedback effect. We actually have technology in our systems to deal with that so that those kind of problems don't happen.
Well, right. If the pipe is collapsing, you could actually make the problem worse, or you just at a certain point you got to let it fail, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But what we do is we limit the retransmissions, and so we basically limit the problem from even occurring if it starts to happen.
Very cool. Very cool. So I think we covered everything on this slide. Let me advance.
I should go just one other thing on that slide. In the setup, you only really need to open up one port. There are technologies like RIST that require 2 ports or more. Actually, 2 ports. Yeah, it depends how you set it up. But with our technology, you only have to open up one port if you're pushing the stream out from the encoder to the decoder, in terms of what you have to open up on the firewall on the receiving end.
From working in the trenches, and I'm sure you can agree, but from our perspective, getting those ports open sometimes is the biggest challenge. I know at some of the major networks, the IT departments are so overworked. They're like, oh yeah, we'll open that port in 6 months. We're like, the event is Saturday. I need the port open now.
Right, and that's why we have the other ability to just connect to a server, and then you don't have to worry about it, or to do the other mode of operation. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, you can go to the next one.
But even one port under normal circumstances, that's amazing. I don't know of any other system that can work with it. Only one port.
So okay, so now we're getting. So that was really what I had to say about ARQ. At this point in the talk, we're talking about our products.
Okay.
And we'll be focusing mostly on the newest product, and we have a whole line of products. We have H264 HD encoder and decoder. There are workhorses. They're designed for broadcasters. They do the closed captioning. They're designed for 24/7 operation. Instead of one stereo pair like some of the cheaper encoders or decoders have, this can do 2 stereo pairs, can encode or decode up to 1080p60. It's 3G SDI I/O on it. Can even pass Dolby audio. And we also, in addition to ARQ, that unit can handle RTMP if you want to send to a CDN. As we discuss later on with the QV codec, we've even expanded that. So in addition to RTMP and HLS, which I should have mentioned the current box can do, we can also do other ARQs like SRT and Zixi. We'll get to that later. We have our media server software. So if you have a box that's a legacy unit, you wanted to add ARQ to it, as I mentioned, you can do that very inexpensively in terms of the hardware that you would need. Just like I said, a Raspberry Pi, or you can deploy it in the internet cloud. We actually have 2 new 4K products. We have our higher end unit, which is the 4K HEVC codec, and it's one box that can be set up to do encoding or decoding or both. It has the ability, and we'll get to that in the next slide, I guess. Maybe this is a good time to switch to the other slide. But we also have, all right, so here's, well, actually with all of our products, we really designed the products to be operational 24/7. We have hardware watchdogs, software watchdogs. The hardware is designed so that it won't stop. It'll just keep running. We try to make them compact. All of our products are 1 RU high with a half width rack. So you could put two in a 1RU slot. They have both an internal power supply and the ability to plug in an external power supply. So you could either run it just off of DC, you can run it just off of AC, or you can have a failover capability where you can have it plugged into the second power supply through DC. And if the AC fails, it automatically instantaneously switches to the DC. I already mentioned how you could do both push or pull mode, or both at the same time. You could have an encoder that's pushing to a particular, or a server, or the software server, sending the stream out and having some of the decoders initiating the feed, or having some of the feeds being initiated by the encoder. We have 608 and 708 closed captions on our products, and on the new product, we can do other things like SMPTE time codes. The configuration is just through a browser, but the nice thing there is it doesn't have to be a browser just on your local network. If you're behind a firewall, you could set up an SSH tunnel with our boxes, and you can literally get to any box without having to poke holes through the firewall, because they could contact out to a server that you could set up outside of the firewall. And using SSH tunneling, you can get to the web interface of boxes that are behind firewalls. But we do build them to be really secure against hackers, because we built these boxes with built-in whitelist-based firewalls. So you can put the boxes directly on the public internet, and we have a lot of security built into the boxes to prevent hacking. Okay.
Very cool.
So talking specifically about our newest product, the QV Codec 4K, as I mentioned, it does ultra high definition video. It can do that with HDR, or high dynamic range, for the color. So you get the beautiful colors, the larger color space, the larger range of between bright and dark of the colors. It uses HEVC encoding. You could also encode it in the old H.264, but there's H.265, which is also known as HEVC, which in many cases you can only require about half the bandwidth with HEVC, especially if you're doing 4K video. It's much more efficient. The HDR, it has the capability of sending the HDR metadata, encoding that into the encoder. One of the newer techniques that we've used in these boxes as security against hackers is to disable logging in with a login and password. We have the ability that in these units so that you just can log in. The only way you can get access to the box is if you have a certificate, like an SSH certificate installed in the box, and there's no other logins, there's no username or password that anyone can try to guess or hack.
I know with many of our customers, we work with a few studios, Paramount Studios, Viacom, Nickelodeon. Security is the top priority. Ever since Sony was hacked in Hollywood, all the studios are so paranoid about eavesdropping, or their worst fear is production content before a movie is released or before a TV show is released. They're moving video around between post-production and production. If some of that leaked out, it could ruin the whole season of a show, and it's millions of dollars are at stake, if not billions, if a movie gets hacked, right?
So this product was designed from the ground up to be really secure. I mean, there is encryption in there, AES 256, but in terms of anti-hacking, there's not even the ability to log in as root, unless, again, we can set it up that way. But when we ship the units out, root login is not only is root login disabled and disabling of logging in with a username or password, but there's no mechanism in the box for anyone to load any software that's not been authorized by QVidium. We have our own servers with software that's both been authenticated and encrypted. So nobody can take one of our units and try to fool it by putting bogus software on there, because our software is authenticated with certificates. It's also encrypted. So the bit streams that go into the FPGAs, the bootloader, they're both encrypted and authenticated. So these units are hack-proof, and they're hack-proof with a battery backed key. In other words, if somebody tries to go into the unit and try to figure out what is the key inside the thing, they, as soon as they disconnected the battery and took, you know, the board out of the box, you know, there's a small lithium cell in there, which the key disappears. It's lost,
Right.
and they would have no access to it. And there's no access, even if they were trying to poke some pins on it to even get into it, to look at the bit stream or any of the bits floating around for the key. So it's extremely secure, built again from the ground up in the lowest levels to the highest levels, both the security, authentication, encryption. But it is built, and we use standard RPM packages. We have a server. So as I mentioned, you can't even put bogus or hacker software on there. There's a button that makes it really easy to upgrade this box. If you want to upgrade the box, there's one button that says upgrade. You do it when on your time. It's not going to interrupt anything that's going on in the box. So if you press that one button, it goes to our server. If anything needs upgrading, it does it automatically. There's nothing to download, and there's nothing you can download except what's authorized by us. We have modular I/O daughter cards. So the basic unit comes with 12 GSDI port on it and an SFP, so you can put a second port, say optical, on there. You could also put a second Ethernet port, so that it could also be optical. In fact, it could even have the ability to go up to 10 gigabit Ethernet. In addition to the regular Ethernet port, there's a USB port now for console if we needed to get in there for some reason. You wanted us to help with something at a low level. There's also another USB 3 port for adding additional disk drives or disk space if you wanted to record video and have it stored on the unit, or playback video that was stored on the unit. So it has these recording and playback features in addition to being able to do multiple IOs. We have a quad IO card so that you can use the unit literally as 4 completely independent encoders and decoders. So for example, you can set up 2 or 3 of the ports of the 3G we have this card has 4 3G SDI ports. So you can have, say, 1 or 2 of them be encoders and the others be decoders. You get in any mix, any combination you want of encoders and decoders. So this is, I think, a fairly unique feature that if you want to take this to a stadium, you can have 3 cameras connected to it where it's doing 3 encodes of the 3 cameras on the field, and then have a return feed from the studio on the 4th port, and at very low latency. I didn't mention here, but the latency is around 1/10 of a second. So you can, having the low latency and the bidirectional operation, it's like having a very high quality video conferencing system.
So the B and C's are input outputs. You define whether it's an in or an out, a decode or encode via the software. It's
exactly
ambidextrous.
right.
That's
Absolutely.
awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and we do that with all the ports, even the 12 GSDI port or the SFPs. They're all designed to be either input or outputs, and so you can, in fact, if we have one customer who wants to use it for 2 4K 30 feeds, where he wants, I think in that case, he wants them both inputs, but you can do input and output at the same time, where you use one of the SFPs, let's say, for output, or you can actually have an SFP with 2 miniature SDI ports on there and have it be bidirectional. Now, I mentioned about our QVidium patented ARQ. I mean, if you ask me, I think it's the best ARQ out there, but now there's a lot of other people doing ARQ.
Are you biased, Ron?
I might be, but we do have the patent, okay? So the patent.
Yeah. If you invented it, I think you know what you're doing.
And our patent protects it in terms of being able to do things that no one else is going to be able to do without infringing on
Correct.
the patent.
Right. Other ARQs have to kind of go around, unless they're licensing something from you, they have to go around.
Exactly. Now, but we do offer RIST, and we're members of the RIST committee. We have both main profile and simple profile RIST. I think we're the first ones to actually have a main profile implementation of RIST and demonstrate that with multiple interop demos with the RIST. We have SRT on there. We not only do we have Zixi on there, we're actually, by the way, own founder stock in Zixi, and so the founding of Zixi had a little bit to do with QVidium and the fact that we have to get it going. And like I said, has founder stock. We also, our units have, we're ZenMaster certified and Zixi certified for just interoperability with their server for our encoder. We can also do MPEG-, RTMP, and HLS. So you could hook these things up and send streams to or from CDNs with that. And when I say RTMP,
you bring up a good point that comes up a lot, Ron. When you say, this is, QV-ARQ or QVidium ARQ is patented, that might scare certain people off. It's like, well, I don't want to be boxed in and then not have any interoperability. You consider interoperability a very important part of your offering. You're doing interops at Video Services Forum and at NAB, right? What other? So you can. I guess the point is, what do? You turn off the ARQ and use the open source RIST instead?
Yeah, there's a menu item that lets you select for the IP transport, and you could select between UDP, which is just the simplest thing, or RIST, SRT, Zixi, ARQ, RTMP, HLS. I mean, you just have a laundry list of all these things that you could select. And by the way, the RTMP, we also have RTMP-S, so you could work with Facebook and have it secure and encrypted. So we're fully interoperable. We want to be interoperable with everybody else's gear. If you want to do, HEVC, HD video, or even just standard high def video, or anything you want, these boxes are fully interoperable.
Very good, very good. Yeah, I think is there one more slide, or no? That's a few more. So yeah, this is pictures 1,000 words. You can see these units are really well built, really great manufacturing, very solid, very robust. Maybe tell us what we see here, Ron.
So the front, you see the fan, of course, and the power light. There's not much to talk about on the top photo, which is the front. But the bottom photo really shows you everything. And we got this obviously tested for CE and FCC certification. So all those little symbols on the side that you see there, it's perfectly compliant with the latest safety standard. For if you're going to send these things out to Europe, we even have a special sticker if you're going to send it to Norwegian country or Scandinavian countries that they required. So it's fully compliant with both the safety and EMC standards. And you could see the power jacks on the left. So going from left to right, there's a micro SD slot where you could store video or play back video. We have the two SFP connectors. One is designed for a second Ethernet port, which could be optical. It could even go up to 10 gigabit, although right now the standard configuration is for 1 gigabit if you plug an SFP in there. We have the two 12G SDI ports on here. One is through the SFP, and the other is coax. They're both bidirectional. We have a small Genlock input that we don't have that feature implemented just yet, but the hardware is all there. So if you needed a hardware Genlock, we're planning on having that down the road if there's demand for it. Haven't had a lot of demand yet, but it's there. There's a display port for output, another USB port for storing video or playing back video as an alternative to the micro HD and as an alternative to a lot of flash memory inside the unit. There's that small console port that's great for hooking up. It just gives you access into the low-level Linux console. Again, we've blocked out root, and so if you want to use that, it's even secure in the sense of somebody getting access to the box and trying to plug into the box. There's a standard Ethernet port with some indicator lights, and then we have the daughter card that sits on top of it. The daughter card we have shown here is the Quad I/O card, which is probably going to be the most popular one. It are the 4 ports we talked about, where each one of those 3G SDI ports can be either input or output. If you happen to have a camera or a system that needs to do 2-sample interleave as a way of inputting 4K video, we can do that. We have some other daughter cards, one for input and one for output for 2-sample interleave, so you can do 4K with quad 3G ports.
Well, it's to me, this is you know, when you have a smaller box like this, customers will be like, oh well, I really want redundant power, and you have that. You power supply number 1 is AC, and then you could have an external. You could feed it DC directly, or have an AC to DC converter box to give it dual redundant power to make this a real enterprise and robust and reliable solution, correct?
Right, and I do want to point out, as it says in the upper right side of the lower photo, this box is made in the US, which has implications if you're going to be sending to government agencies.
Yes.
For example, there's requirements for that. And it also helps in terms of the supply chain of being able to get these things out to you. If you place an order, we try to always keep some units, a good number of units in stock, and so we've minimized supply chain problems as well.
It's very good, very good. Now, VidOvation's colors, I don't know if you realize, Ron, blue and like different shades of blue, dark blue. I like the color blue.
Yeah, well, maybe nice. You can see that with my shirt. So there's some specs on the unit. Glass to glass, 120 milliseconds. We were at a recent conference, VidTrans conference, showing that off. I think we had the lowest latency demo of encoding, decoding there. We were also doing, at the same time it was sending to another unit, we were sending a RIS stream over to the interop. In order to help get the really low latency, and we can actually do lower than that, we just haven't implemented some of the features because it didn't seem to be a need yet, but we're able to do what's called gradual decoder refresh, where instead of sending and encoding a whole iframe at one big chunk, it does it in stripes. You could select either horizontal or vertical stripes for that, and gets the latency way down on the encoding. So most of that latency, actually, when I specify 120, that's mostly on the decoder. The encoder latency is just a fraction of that.
Well, you often see in transmission a big spike up when the iframe goes, and then you see other little smaller spikes. I guess, what do you send? iframes, B frames, A frames? What does your pictures look like?
So we're doing the same thing. We have iframes, B frames, and P frames, or I, P, and B. But the iframe is broken up into these little stripes, so you don't get this big burst of packets when you do in a new iframe, because it's done in these stripes. The burstiness is much more
spread it out a little bit, so you don't you don't put, if your connection is a little if you're pushing it to the minimum, the maximum, you don't get a glitch. You don't want the ARQ to kick in unnecessarily, so that helps smooth out the transmission.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does two things. It smooths out the transmission, as you said, and then it also gives you much lower latency.
Interesting.
So as I mentioned, we can do both 264 or HEVC. There's the box does such a good job with HEVC, there's really almost no reason to use the H.264. It's more for backward compatibility because it's about half the bandwidth.
Right.
The same box can be set up to do 422 or 420, can be used set up for 8-bit or 10-bit. I guess I didn't put that on the slide, but it does do either. For HDR, you really need 10-bit video encoding, and that's what this box can do. But you could set it, if you want to be backward compatible with older things, you could set it for 420 8-bit encoding instead. If you really want good contribution quality, you could set it for 422 10-bit and throw in the HDR metadata. Talk about the color spaces. It could go up to the Rec 2020, which is for HDR. And, you know, it could do HDR not just on 4K, but HDR makes a big improvement even with regular HD video.
Oh, I didn't know that was. You only hear of HDR in reference to 4K. So right, you can add HDR metadata to HD. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, you can, absolutely.
Okay. And then if you have a television that supports HDR, if it drops down to HD, the metadata will be put in there.
Yeah, so what happens is HDR, if you send HDR stream to a non-HDR compliant receiver, you still get the video. It just, the colors look a little washed out without adding the metadata. And you could also add the metadata by hand on some equipment. For example, we have an AJA converter that handles HDR, but since it didn't handle it in the metadata, there's a user interface on it so that you can add in the metadata by hand. Most HDR compliant streams nowadays it's just a static template of metadata for the whole program, but there is also the ability to do dynamic metadata where it's different for each frame.
Gotcha. All right, are you ready for the next slide?
Yeah, I am. So I think I talked about most of this. The box can do file recording or playback. I mentioned the ports on there before, the quad 3G ports. It has a display port if you want to monitor the output. It has that ability, as we talked before, about using it as a quad encoder/decoder. Each one is independent. The audio I didn't mention before. This box, unlike our earlier generation boxes, has 8 channels of embedded audio. In other words, 4 stereo pairs. And so with the 4, if you use the quad encoder-decoder capability, you're talking about 32 channels total of audio in this one box.
I've learned, I'm sure you've learned this too, even though we're in the video business, you can never have enough audio. The audio, you know, 4 to 1, 8 to 1. So 8 channels of audio for each video. That's impressive. That's good. People will use it.
And another feature that we spend a lot of time with is processing the ancillary data in the SDI. So it can handle closed captions, which is something people aren't doing much with 4K yet, but it has that ability in there. But we also have the ability to process simply time codes, which could be really useful if you want to do a synchronization amongst multiple encoders and decoders. We think that could be really useful for that. Or putting in add insertion markers.
Yeah, that for distribution, that can be important. There's a SMPTE standard around that. I don't remember the SMPTE number, but that came up with a customer not too long ago needing the add insertion markers or the metadata for that.
Yeah. So just to be really clear on that, some of that is not implemented yet. It has the ability, if we had a customer request for it, it's something we would put a lot of time into, and it wouldn't take too much time to get done.
Okay. All right, let me see. I think you touched on security before.
We touched on security here. Here it is in bullet points. Secure against malware, the it basically locks out any foreign software from being able to be downloaded into the box, disable root access, disable a password login with username and password. It has the ability to encrypt the streams, whitelist-based firewall built into the box, and SSL support. For if you're doing web access, it's like doing HTTPS, which encrypts the web access.
Very cool, very cool.
So I talked about some of this, the one-touch update. There's one button you press if it needs to be updated. It does it on your schedule. And it does whatever it needs to do automatically. And that's the only way of getting updates in there. You can't get hackerware software in there. It's done using standard RPM, which is a technology that's been in Linux systems for a long time now. And I like the fact it's secure. It gives you keeps track of the versioning of different features so that you're not getting the wrong update. The ability to do the tunneling through firewalls. This is equivalent to what Zixi talks about with their ZenMaster certification, which we have, but we also have our own mechanism in addition that allows you to get access to the box by tunneling through the firewall where the box is. If you set up your own SSH server, I talked about again the putting in the public and private keys and the encrypted communications, SSH access. And we do have, QVidium does have a network management system. So if you buy a lot of these boxes, you can have a server that you could set up that could monitor multiple boxes all with one glance. See which ones are up, down.
So let me ask you, Ron. So when you say you tunnel through the firewall, what are you doing? You're coming in and out of port 80 or something? How do you? You're using one of the ports that's already open to communicate?
So it's actually doing SSH. Okay, so the communication isn't even done through port 80 anymore. It's going through the SSH port, which you could configure to be. SSH is normally port 22, but you could set it to be something else to be a little more secure. You could say 2022, and it could contact an SSH tunneling server. So the box, basically you set up the box with the IP address or the DNS name of the server you're going to use. It's the box, the QVidium codec box is sitting behind the firewall in some location. It's going to send packets out upstream through the internet over to the server. Now, most firewalls will let packets out. They just block packets from coming in. Now, there are some firewalls that will block both directions, and obviously you're going to have to work with the IT department if that's the case. I've seen that in some hospitals. But most places, if they allow outbound packets, you plop the box down. You don't even have to configure an IP address on the box. You can pre-configure the box with just for DNS, or I'm sorry, for DHCP access, so that, and you could pre-configure the box with the IP address of the tunneling server. So you can take a box that has been sort of pre-configured like that for DHCP and with the tunneling turned on, send it out to a client. They can plug it in, and they don't have to do anything.
Then you go into the cloud and then find it through the and you'll find it automatically through the SSH server.
Right. It automatically is going to set up its IP configuration with the DHCP stuff, and it automatically contacts the server. You know what port you've assigned to it on the server. It's encrypted. You can go into it. No one else can. And again, and you have access to that unit. Even though it's sitting behind a firewall, and
wow.
You haven't had to do anything.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
Oh boy. So I talked about all of these connectors on the box, I think. Instead of having the old-fashioned RS-232 console port, it's kind of useful if you have a troubleshooting session to have that console port. has the ability with the SFPs, gives you a lot more flexibility. You can do dual redundancy with the Ethernet because of the SFPs on there and the gigabit Ethernet port. All that
So
extra.
yeah, so what are you doing with redundancy and bonding? What exactly does that mean? What are you implementing
Well,
there?
there is that capability. I mean, if you had, let's say, two different Ethernet links going out two different modems, and you had sort of limited bandwidth on each modem, you could bond two links together. That's sort of what bonding is about. We haven't had too many people needing that, but the box is certainly capable of that if you need it.
Okay.
It would be some optional software we'd have to add to the box, but it's bonding is something we've done in the past. For example, we have the technology in our older box. We just haven't had many people needing to do that, not with higher speed links.
Okay. Okay.
This
is the daughter card you mentioned.
Yep, and in the future we are going to consider if somebody needs, for example, a QAM modulator built into the box. We've had a few people thinking that might be a useful feature. Because we have an FPGA that the thing is built around, there's a lot of flexibility. For example, right now it's doing HEVC and H.264 encoding. Because it's built around an FPGA, we can actually add something like simply 2110, which is sort of a light compression of raw Ethernet and a raw SDI around it.
So that would be something you'd implement with the daughter board.
Actually, it's probably the wrong slide to talk about. We could do it with or without the daughter board. It would be something you'd actually put into the FPGA.
Okay. Okay. And the QAM modulator, you'd put that on the encoder, to drive like a cable TV system? Yeah.
We could put it on. That would be something you put on a daughter card, so that you would have an RF interface on the daughter card, so that it would, when you encoded the video, it would go directly out as RF.
Okay. All right.
So in conclusion, we try to keep, right now we have stock, and our business model is to always have stock of product. If you buy the box, there's going to be tech support included in the purchase. It comes with 1-year warranty. All the software, firmware, and updates are free. There is a rack mount kit available. As I mentioned, you can put 2 units in a 1RU slot or 1 unit in a 1RU slot. We have those rack mount options available. And we're a small company. We're always open to feedback and suggestions.
Well, yes, VidOvation too. We love talking to our customers. Some of our greatest inventions come from our customers' ideas. So your invention of ARQ came from the telemedicine, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger demanded that you make it work. You make it work now. Now it will work. So thank you so much, Ron. I hope our technical glitch with the questions didn't impede anyone's questions. I'm sorry, I actually meant to put a contact slide for VidOvation in here. I forgot to do that. I'm sorry. If you have any questions, you can call VidOvation at 949-777-5435. You can email sales@vidovation.com. That's VidOvation. People have a tendency to want to put an E in VidOvation. It's VidOvation. We'd love to hear your questions, your feedback, your comments. You can text me at 516-551-3201 if you have any questions. Looks like that's it, Ron. That was a good 90 minutes of knowledge you laid on us there. I think I'm going to need some brain food for lunch today to get those neurons going and keep absorb all that knowledge. Thank you so much. And if anyone's interested in this technology, please reach out to VidOvation. Visit our website at vidovation.com, VidOvation.com, or give us a call at 949-777-5435. Thank you, everyone. Be safe out there. Be healthy. We hope to see you soon at some point. Hopefully we'll have a trade show at some point in the future, Ron, but until then, we'll work virtually. Thank you, Ron. Thank you for participating today. We appreciate your expertise, and thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Ron. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
You too. Okay.